Hello! Welcome to my tiny little shop here in Tennessee. In the past I've made videos recording some of my fiddle making adventures, and in my videos I tried to highlight things that were interesting to me about fiddle making. But I've had requests for something more comprehensive, kind of a how-to, step-by-step. So I'm going to do a little series on building a fiddle from start to finish. What's the difference between a fiddle and a violin? Attitude. Oh, a violin's okay. They're kind of prissy. They have a spruce top and a flame maple back, and they're all exactly the same color. What's a fiddle? It's homespun. I built it with my own two hands in my backyard with whatever I had on hand, and if you don't like it, I don't care. Building a fiddle is freeing. There's no boundaries. There are no rules. You don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks. You're doing this for you because you feel like it. Alright, now that we've got your attitude established, what's the first thing you need to start building your fiddle? Information. Here's a few sources of information. This book, The Art of Violin Making, I cannot recommend it enough. It has great pictures, instructions on carving, it's got dimensions, all kinds of facts, figures, even some templates you can copy. Here's another one. This one here runs about 20 bucks if you look around. This fellow wrote this a while ago, and it's fairly homespun. You can see it was typed in an old-fashioned typewriter, and this has everything you need, including multiple full-scale templates. There's a fair amount of reading involved and a lot less of the pictures. Now the other source of information is probably the best website out there, makingtheviolin.com. This has everything you're going to need. Tools, materials, templates, molds and blocks. It has everything. It has templates that you can print out on your printer and then lay them on the wood. And it's free. That fella has put a ton of work into the website, and it is well worth going through. Don't take shortcuts. Do the reading. What are you going to build? A Stradivari or a Guarneri? Does it matter? Probably not. I like the Guarneri. It's my favorite. I like the tone. I like the F-holes. So I picked a Guarneri. Now you're going to need a pattern. Let me show you my first pattern. I literally traced a violin onto paper. Well, this is more like cardstock. This was for the back and the top. This template was for the mold. I got a contour gauge from the hardware store. And then I made these little templates for the curvature. And I made this template from those out of a piece of thin birch plywood. And from that, I made this out of 3/4 inch plywood to build the violin on. Now another way to go, and especially if you're going to do more than one fiddle, go on to internationalviolin.com. Check out some of the templates they have there. These are stainless steel. They had a great sale, and I could not resist picking them up. There are also die-cut nylon templates available on eBay that are well worth looking into. Now that you've got some information and you've given yourself a direction to head, you need some materials to build with. What are you going to make your fiddle out of? Now for the soundboard, the top, you're going to want spruce. You can use pine if it's close-grained, and cedar works well. Quarter sawn, you want the grain going up and down. For the back, one of the softer hardwoods is terrific. Now I made a fiddle with a poplar back. I got the poplar from Home Depot. Worked out fantastic. Maple, walnut, cherry, any of those. And I would encourage you to look, what do you have on hand? What is easily available to you right now that you can lay your hands on? You need your wood to be at least 3/4 of an inch thick. The piece you're going to carve your top and back from needs to be at least 8 1/4 inches wide and 15 inches long. Now, this right here is a piece of cherry that a good friend of mine gave me, and I'm going to carve a one-piece back out of it. But you can take a piece, cut it, and open it, and laminate it together, and have a book-matched back and a book-matched top. This is an example of what you'll be looking for. This is a block of spruce from a tree in my backyard. And this is quarter sawn grain. And that line, that's where I would split this so that I could lay it out and laminate it together, and then I'd end up with this. That's what I did here on this piece. There are many potential sources of wood for your fiddle project. This is a spruce beam from a very old building up in New Hampshire, and it has some wonderful grain in it. These old cabinet doors are made out of wormy chestnut, and I'm trying to figure out how I can use them. This piece of cherry is older than me. I even made a fiddle out of a 2x8 from Home Depot. So be creative as you source your wood. Planning is important. The next step is to take our templates and start doing a layout on our piece of wood. The first thing I had to consider for this piece of cherry was the orientation of the annual rings of the block of wood. In the top drawing, the annual rings go up, arch up like a rainbow. I do not want the arch of my violin to follow the annual rings, because in doing so, as we cut this, a large portion of the ends of the grain will be exposed to the air and will make this more susceptible to shrinking and expanding. The second drawing shows the annual rings inverted. This is what I'm looking for, and that will reduce the size of the end of the grain that is available to absorb moisture. Because I'm using a piece of figured cherry, I have to be very careful. Figured wood is wood with tight knots and pretty whirls in the grain. And you can see up here I've already had one defect to avoid. But after I traced out the shape of my fiddle, I noticed this defect. It's the remains of a little knot. Now that's a hard area that will be difficult to carve. So I've decided to move this whole thing up about an inch. I need to have enough material here for my sides and lay out how I'm going to cut the block for the neck. Because I'm just using a 3/4 inch board, I'm going to cut two pieces and laminate them together for my neck to give me a block with a finished width of 1.5 inches wide and 2 1/4 inches tall, and that'll fit my Guarneri scroll. You could probably go a hair smaller if you're building a Stradivari. Alright, we've done our planning, we've done some layout on the board, we have an idea in our head what direction we're headed. The next step is to actually make some sawdust. Well, there are my preliminary cuts using the table saw. Material for the neck, the sides, and the back. And this is something that I do. I use the table saw to cut off all I can to facilitate carving. I'm going to end up with a piece that looks like this. And then I'm going to trim off even more using that same table saw. And that gives me a piece that looks something like this. Now, next step will be to cut the outline of the fiddle. You don't have to do all those fancy cuts on the table saw if you don't have one. Heck, they've been making fiddles for hundreds and hundreds of years with only hand tools. Now, I've got to cut the outline out of that fiddle. And I may do it here on this little tiny bandsaw, but you don't have to. A good old handheld jigsaw works terrific. And that's as close as we're going to get. You want to leave the line. I didn't tell you that before. And we're going to sand or file down to that pencil line. That's the only way to be accurate enough. We haven't discussed hand tools yet. Now, one of the items you're going to want to add to your list are some files. Flat file, round file. This one here is more of a rasp. It's fairly coarse, but these come in awful handy for shaping wood. Even a chainsaw file has come in handy for me numerous times. Keep your eyes open for a set of small files. My wife sewed me this little pouch to keep them in check here. Those will be handy later for detail work. Now we can use the file to bring the wood down to the line. You can use sandpaper on a block of wood, sandpaper on a dowel for this part. You can have a makeshift spindle sander, buy one of these little kits and turn your drill press into a spindle sander, or make your own. Grab a hole saw, knock out some little pieces of wood, stack them up, glue them together, put a bolt through it, and grab a piece of leftover belt from a belt sander or other kind of sandpaper, spray adhesive. This works great as a makeshift spindle sander on your drill press. Here's a piece of that old beam, and I started cutting it down and looking at the nail holes and the grain. I found a couple of tight knots in it. I had to do a little more planning on this one to cut it, and this is about where I'm at. And I'll put these together. This is going to make a real nice top. Now that I have the belly plate or top plate gluing up and my future neck block, it's time to think about the last thing we'll do on the table saw, and that is going to be cutting the sides. This is my thin strip jig. Now I want you to say that 3 times fast. Thin strip jig, thin strip jig, thin strip jig. Okay. It's easy to make. You'll find videos on YouTube. And what it does is it fits down in the slot on my table saw. To cut thin strips of wood, we must do 2 things differently. One, we're going to change this insert because it has too much space between the blade and the insert, and we don't want our strips falling down in there. The second thing we're doing is we're going to cut the strips on the outside of the blade as opposed to the inside. Instead of running the fence up like this and hoping and praying we can cut something, we're going to put it out here at a safe distance and use our thin strip jig. Our workpiece is going to go on this side of the fence. The thin strip jig acts as a stop, allowing us to cut a very small piece just to the outside of the blade. We stop it here and we set our fence. Now we're shooting for a hair over 1 millimeter. got my first test piece all done. Look at that. Nice and thin. Alright, well, we'll throw the gauge on here. On this side I got 1.6. On this, the opposite edge, it's 1.7, 1.5, 1.6. That's terrific. We're going to do some scraping and sanding to get these into shape. We're shooting for about 1 millimeter so it will bend real nice. Time to go cut the real thing. Now I have a nice set of strips for the size of our fiddle. In a half of a Saturday in the shop, you can have all the major components for your fiddle cut out and ready to go, and your bike warming up for a ride. In the next video, we'll get out our form, we'll put on the corner blocks, we'll take a look at hot hide glue, assemble our sides, and get our top and back ready for carving. See you then.